The autumn rain drummed against the windows of our two-story colonial house in Salem, Massachusetts, creating a steady rhythm that had become the soundtrack to my sleepless nights. It was 2:47 a.m. when I heard it again, the soft scraping sound coming from upstairs, from Danny's room. I pushed myself up from the kitchen table where I'd been sitting with my third cup of coffee, staring at unpaid bills and wondering how I'd become a single mother of a 7-year-old boy who barely spoke anymore. The divorce had been finalized 6 months ago, and Danny had retreated into himself like a turtle pulling into its shell. The hardwood floors creaked under my bare feet as I climbed the stairs. The scraping stopped. I paused outside Danny's door, my hand hovering over the brass doorknob that had been painted over so many times it felt thick and uneven under my palm.
Danny,
I whispered, pressing my ear to the door. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Silence. Then, the faint sound of covers rustling. I turned the knob slowly and peered inside. The room was dark except for the glow of his astronaut nightlight, casting dancing shadows of rockets and planets across the walls. Danny was in bed, his small form barely visible under the Batman comforter his father had bought him for Christmas last year, back when we were still pretending everything was fine.
Mom.
His voice was small, uncertain. "I heard noises, baby.
Were you drawing again?"
He nodded, his dark hair messy against the pillow.
"I couldn't sleep."
I stepped into the room, my eyes adjusting to the dim light.
That's when I saw them. New marks on the ceiling directly above his bed.
They looked like symbols, drawn in what appeared to be chalk or crayon. Geometric shapes connected by intricate lines, forming patterns that seemed almost organized. Mathematical, even.
"Danny, what are these?"
I asked, moving closer to his bed and looking up. He followed my gaze and shrugged. "I don't know. They just come to me. In my dreams." A chill ran down my spine.
"In your dreams?"
"Yeah. There's this man, and he shows me things. He says they're important, that I need to remember them." I sat on the edge of his bed, my heart racing. "What man, honey? What does he look like?" "He's tall, and he has kind eyes. But he's sad, Mom. Really sad. He says he's been waiting for someone to help him." The rain outside intensified, and I could hear the wind picking up, rattling the old windows. I looked up at the ceiling again, trying to make sense of the symbols. They weren't random scribbles. They had structure, purpose. Some looked almost like mathematical equations, others like star charts. "Danny, how long have you been having these dreams?"
"Since Dad left," he said quietly, and my heart broke a little more. I reached out and smoothed his hair.
"Sweetheart, I need you to tell me if this man has ever asked you to do anything else.
Anything that made you uncomfortable."
"No, Mom. He just shows me the symbols and asks me to remember them. He says they're like a map."
"A map to what?"
"I don't know. He never tells me that part." I spent the next hour sitting with Danny until he fell asleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The symbols on the ceiling seemed to pulse in the darkness, and I could swear I heard whispers in the wind outside. When I finally went back to my own room, I grabbed my laptop and started searching for information about children drawing symbols, night terrors, and psychological effects of divorce on kids. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about the divorce. This was something else entirely. 3 days later, I was working late in my home office, a converted bedroom on the first floor where I did freelance graphic design work to make ends meet, when I heard Danny's footsteps above me. It was past midnight, and he should have been asleep hours ago. I saved my work and headed upstairs, expecting to find him in the bathroom or getting a drink of water. Instead, I found his bedroom door ajar, and a strange soft blue light emanating from within. My breath caught in my throat. The light was coming from the ceiling. I pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. Danny was standing on his bed, reaching up toward the ceiling with a piece of chalk in his hand. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. It was the fact that the symbols he'd drawn were glowing. Actually glowing with an ethereal blue light that pulsed gently like a heartbeat.
Danny!
I called out, my voice sharper than I intended. He turned to look at me, and I gasped. His eyes were completely white, no pupils visible, and when he spoke, his voice sounded different, older, more distant. The pattern isn't complete yet, he said.
He needs me to finish it.
Danny, come down from there right now. I moved toward him, my hands shaking. As soon as I touched his arm, he blinked rapidly and his eyes returned to normal. The blue glow from the ceiling began to fade, but didn't disappear entirely. It dimmed to a barely perceptible luminescence.
Mom!
He looked confused, scared. What happened?
Why am I standing on my bed?
I lifted him down, holding him close. His small body was trembling, and I could feel my own heart hammering against my ribs. You were sleepwalking, baby.
Having another dream.
I don't remember, he whispered against my shoulder. But I feel sad. Really, really sad. I carried him to the living room and made us both hot chocolate, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. The symbols were still faintly glowing when I checked on them 20 minutes later, like glow-in-the-dark paint, but I knew they weren't made with anything artificial. The next morning, I called Danny's pediatrician, Dr. Martinez, and scheduled an emergency appointment. I also called my sister Janet, who lived in Boston. Janet, I need to ask you something weird, I said, pacing around the kitchen while Danny ate his cereal. Do you remember anything strange about our family? About Mom or Dad ever mentioning anything unusual? What kind of unusual?
Sarah, you're scaring me.
I told her about the symbols, about the dreams, about the glowing. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Janet, are you still there? Sarah, I need to tell you something. Something I probably should have told you years ago. My stomach dropped.
What?
It's about Uncle Theodore, Dad's brother, the one who died when we were kids. I sat down at the kitchen table. Uncle Theodore was barely mentioned in our family, and when he was, it was always in hushed tones.
What about him?
He didn't die in a car accident like they told us. He died in a psychiatric hospital. Dad visited him once, right before he passed, and when he came home, he was different. Shaken up. He told Mom that Theodore kept talking about symbols, about patterns in the ceiling of his room. He said Theodore claimed someone was trying to communicate with him. The spoon slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. Janet, you're telling me this runs in the family? I don't know, Sarah. But Mom burned all of Theodore's belongings after he died. Everything except one thing. A journal. I found it in the attic when I was helping clean out Mom and Dad's house last year. Do you still have it? Yes. And Sarah, the symbols Theodore drew in that journal, they looked just like the ones you described to me. I looked over at Danny, who was quietly eating his cereal and humming to himself. He seemed normal, just a regular 7-year-old boy with messy hair and milk on his upper lip. But I knew what I'd seen the night before. Janet, I need you to bring me that journal. Today. I'll be there in 2 hours. After I hung up, I sat at the table watching Danny finish his breakfast. The morning sun was streaming through the windows, making everything look normal and safe. But I couldn't shake the image of those glowing symbols, or the sound of Danny's voice when it wasn't quite his own.
Danny, I said carefully, the man in your dreams, has he ever told you his name?
Danny looked up at me, a drop of milk sliding down his chin. Uncle Teddy, he said simply. He says he's my Uncle Teddy. Janet arrived at 3:30 p.m., her usually perfect blonde hair disheveled and her face pale. She'd driven from Boston in record time, and I could see the worry etched in the lines around her eyes, lines that hadn't been there a year ago. Where is it? I asked before she'd even fully stepped through the front door. She held up a leather-bound journal, its cover worn and stained with age. Sarah, before you look at this, I need you to promise me something.
What?
Promise me that if this gets too weird, too dangerous, you'll pack up Danny and come stay with me and Tom. No questions asked. I took the journal from her hands. It was heavier than I'd expected, and it felt warm to the touch. I promise. Danny was upstairs in his room, playing with his Legos, or at least, I hoped he was playing and not drawing more symbols. Janet and I sat at the kitchen table, and I opened the journal to the first page. Theodore's handwriting was shaky, erratic, but legible. Day 1 at Danvers State Hospital. They say I'm having a breakdown, but I know better. The symbols are real. The man who visits me is real. He says his name is Marcus, and he's been trapped for decades. The symbols are a key, a way to open the door he's been locked behind. I looked at Janet. Marcus. Keep reading. I flipped through several pages of increasingly frantic entries. Theodore wrote about seeing a tall man with kind but sad eyes, about being shown complex mathematical patterns and star charts, about feeling compelled to draw the symbols on every surface he could find. Then I found the drawings. Page after page of symbols, identical to the ones Danny had been drawing on his ceiling. But these were more complete, more complex. They formed intricate patterns that seemed to move when I looked at them, creating optical illusions that made my head spin. Janet, look at this. I pointed to an entry dated just a week before Theodore's death. The door is almost open. Marcus says he's been waiting for someone in the family to help him cross over. He died in this hospital in 1943, in the room that's now mine. He was a patient here, just like me. But he never left. He's been trapped between worlds, and the symbols are his way of reaching out. He's not evil, he's just lost, desperate to find peace. But I'm scared. The more I draw, the more I can feel him trying to come through. What if opening the door lets in more than just Marcus? What if there are others? I closed the journal and looked at Janet. Danny called him Uncle Teddy. But Theodore never had children. How would Danny know that name? Sarah, there's something else. Something I didn't tell you on the phone. I felt my stomach clench. What? Theodore's room at Danvers State Hospital? Room 237? It's the same room where they found 3 other patients over the years, all of them drawing identical symbols on the walls and ceiling. All of them claimed to see a man named Marcus. The journal slipped from my hands and fell to the floor with a thud. Oh my God! The hospital was demolished in 2006, but the land... Sarah, the land was sold to developers. They built a residential neighborhood on top of it. I stared at her, my mind racing. What's the name of the neighborhood? Maple Heights. My blood ran cold. Janet, that's where we live. This house, this entire street, it's built on the grounds of the old hospital. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the revelation settling over us like a heavy blanket. Outside, the afternoon sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the yard. Mom! Danny's voice came from the top of the stairs. Can you come up here? I need to show you something. Janet and I exchanged glances. I picked up the journal and headed upstairs, my sister close behind me. Danny was standing in the middle of his room, pointing at the ceiling. The symbols were glowing again, but this time they were brighter, more defined. And they were moving, actually shifting and rearranging themselves into new patterns. He's here, Danny said, his voice calm but distant. Uncle Teddy and Marcus. They're both here, and they want to talk to you. I felt Janet's hand grip my arm. Sarah, we need to leave. Now. But as I looked at my son, at the strange peace on his face, I realized that running wasn't going to solve anything. Marcus had been waiting for decades for someone to help him. Theodore had died trying to complete whatever task Marcus had given him. And now it was Danny's turn. unless I could find a way to break the cycle. That night, I sent Danny to stay with Janet while I researched everything I could about Danvers State Hospital, Marcus, and the history of our neighborhood. What I found made my blood run cold. The hospital had been notorious for its brutal treatment of patients, and records showed that a patient named Marcus Whitmore had indeed died there in 1943. He'd been admitted for what they called acute melancholia after losing his entire family in a house fire, a fire that he'd survived but blamed himself for starting. Marcus had been an architect before his breakdown, specializing in sacred geometry and mathematical patterns in building design. The hospital records indicated that he'd become obsessed with drawing symbols on the walls of his room, claiming they were blueprints for crossing over. But the most chilling discovery was what I found in the newspaper archives. Four other patients had occupied room 237 over the years, and all of them had died under mysterious circumstances, found in their beds with no signs of trauma, but with elaborate symbol patterns carved into the walls around them. The last patient had been Theodore. I was still reading when my phone rang at 2:17 a.m. It was Janet. "Sarah, you need to get over here. Now." "What's wrong? Is Danny okay?" "He's sleepwalking again, but this time he's drawing symbols on my walls. And Sarah, they're glowing. Just like at your house." I threw on clothes and drove to Janet's house in Brookline, my mind racing. If the symbols were appearing at Janet's house too, it meant this wasn't tied to the location. It was tied to Danny. I found Janet in her guest room, staring at the wall above the bed where Danny was sleeping. The symbols were there, glowing with that same ethereal blue light, but these were different, more complex, more urgent. "When did this start?" I asked, sitting on the edge of the bed and gently shaking Danny awake. "About an hour ago." He got up, walked to the wall, and started drawing with his finger. No chalk, no crayon, just his finger, and the symbols appeared. Danny opened his eyes and looked at me with that same distant expression. "Mom, they're running out of time." "Who's running out of time, baby?" "Uncle Teddy and Marcus. There's something bad coming, and if they don't cross over soon, it's going to find them. And then it's going to find us." Janet grabbed my arm. "Sarah, what is he talking about?" Danny sat up in bed, more alert now. "There are other spirits trapped in the old hospital grounds. Angry ones. They don't want Marcus to leave because they're afraid if he finds a way out, he'll seal the door behind him and they'll be stuck forever." "How do you know all this?" I asked, pulling him into my lap. "Marcus told me. He's been trying to cross over for 80 years, but every time he gets close, the others stop him. They make the person helping him sick or scared, or they make bad things happen to their family." I thought about Theodore's death, about the other patients who died in room 237. "Danny, what kind of bad things?" "Uncle Teddy got sick and died before he could finish. The others, Marcus says they had accidents, but they weren't really accidents." Janet was pacing now, her hands shaking. "Sarah, this is insane. We're talking about ghosts and spirits like it's normal." "Nothing about this is normal," I said, holding Danny closer. "But we can't ignore it. Look at the evidence, the symbols, the glowing, the history of the hospital. Something is happening here, and Danny is caught in the middle of it." Danny looked up at me with his serious 7-year-old eyes. "Mom, Marcus says if we don't help him soon, the angry spirits are going to get stronger. They're going to start hurting people in the neighborhood, people who live in the houses built on the hospital grounds." "How many houses?" Janet asked. 15 families, Danny said without hesitation. "And they're all going to be in danger if we don't finish the pattern." I stood up, carrying Danny with me. "What pattern? What do you mean finish it?" "The symbols aren't just random drawings. They're a map, like I told you before. But it's not a map of places, it's a map of energy. Marcus says if we complete the pattern, it will create a bridge between worlds, and he can finally cross over and find peace.
And if we don't?
Danny's eyes filled with tears. Then the angry spirits will use the incomplete pattern to break through instead. And they won't be looking for peace, Mom. They'll be looking for revenge. I looked at Janet, who was staring at us with a mixture of fear and disbelief. Outside, the wind was picking up again, rattling the windows and making the house creak. Okay, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. Danny, if we're going to help Marcus, I need you to tell me exactly what we have to do. Janet grabbed my arm.
Sarah, you can't be serious.
Look at those symbols, Janet. Look at my son. This isn't going away. If there's even a chance that Danny is right about other families being in danger, we have to try. Danny wiped his eyes and nodded. Marcus says we need to go back to the house and complete the pattern on my ceiling. But we have to do it before sunrise, or the angry spirits will know what we're doing and try to stop us. I checked my phone. It was 3:45 a.m. We had maybe 2 hours before dawn. Janet, I need you to trust me on this. Will you help us? She looked at Danny, then at the glowing symbols on her wall, then back at me. God help us all, she whispered. But yes, I'll help. We drove back to my house in convoy, Janet following me in her car, both of us checking our mirrors constantly as if we expected to see something pursuing us through the empty streets of Salem. The neighborhood was quiet, sleeping, unaware that their peace might depend on what we were about to do. Danny sat in the passenger seat, clutching Theodore's journal and staring out the window. He'd been quiet during the drive, but I could see his lips moving, as if he was having a conversation with someone I couldn't see. Danny, are you talking to Marcus? He nodded. He's scared. He says the angry spirits know we're coming back. They're gathering. A chill ran down my spine. What does that mean? I don't know, but he says we need to hurry. We pulled into my driveway, and I noticed immediately that something was wrong. The house felt different, heavier, more oppressive. The shadows seemed darker, more defined, and I could swear I heard whispers in the wind. Janet got out of her car and joined us at the front door. Sarah, I don't like this. The whole street feels wrong. She was right. The other houses, normally lit by streetlights and porch lights, seemed to be shrouded in an unnatural darkness. Even the familiar sounds of the neighborhood, the hum of air conditioners, the distant traffic from Route 1A, were muted, as if we were standing inside a bubble of silence. We need to move fast, I said, unlocking the front door. As soon as we stepped inside, the temperature dropped noticeably. Our breath came out in visible puffs, and the hardwood floors creaked loudly under our feet, as if the house itself was protesting our presence. Mom, Danny whispered, tugging on my sleeve. They're here. The angry ones. I looked around the living room. The shadows in the corners seemed to be moving, shifting, and writhing like living things. And there was a sound, a low, constant humming that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Janet, do you hear that? She nodded, her face pale. It sounds like voices. Lots of voices, all talking at once. We climbed the stairs to Danny's room, and I gasped when I saw what was waiting for us. The symbols on the ceiling were glowing brighter than ever, but now they were surrounded by other marks, angry, jagged lines that seemed to be trying to disrupt the pattern. The walls were covered in dark stains that hadn't been there before, and the air smelled of something rotten and old. They're trying to stop us, Danny said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. But Marcus says if we complete the pattern, their power will be broken. I looked at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what needed to be done. The symbols formed a complex mandala-like design, but there were obvious gaps, missing pieces that prevented the pattern from being complete. Danny, what do I need to draw? He opened Theodore's journal to a page near the back, where the symbols were drawn in their complete form. These parts, he said, pointing to specific sections. But Mom, you have to draw them exactly right. If you make a mistake, the door won't open for Marcus, it'll open for the others. Janet found a stepladder in the hall closet, and I climbed up with a piece of chalk Danny had given me. My hands were shaking as I began to draw, following the patterns in Theodore's journal. The chalk felt warm in my fingers, and as I drew, the symbols began to glow brighter. "That's it," Danny said encouragingly. "You're doing great, Mom." But as I worked, the angry humming grew louder, and the shadows on the walls began to move more violently. The dark stains spread across the wallpaper like spilled ink, and I could hear what sounded like scratching inside the walls. "They're getting mad," Danny warned. "Hurry, Mom." I was halfway through the pattern when something grabbed my ankle. I looked down and saw a dark, smoky tendril wrapped around my leg, trying to pull me off the ladder. Janet screamed and grabbed the ladder to steady it. "Sarah, keep drawing. Don't stop." I kicked at the tendril and continued drawing, my heart pounding. The symbols were almost complete now, and I could feel a strange energy building in the room. The air seemed to shimmer, and I caught glimpses of figures standing in the corners, tall, shadow-like beings with glowing red eyes. "Almost there," Danny said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Just 3 more symbols." The shadowy figures were moving closer now, and I could hear their voices, angry, desperate whispers in a language I didn't recognize. But I also heard another voice, calm and reassuring. "Marcus. Don't be afraid," he said, though I couldn't see him. "They can't hurt you if you complete the pattern. Trust in the design." I drew the final symbol, and the moment my chalk finished the last line, the room exploded in brilliant blue light. The shadowy figures screamed, a sound like breaking glass, and were sucked into the glowing pattern on the ceiling as if it had become a vortex. The light grew brighter and brighter, and then suddenly, everything went quiet. The symbols on the ceiling gave one final pulse of light, then faded to a soft, warm glow. The dark stains on the walls disappeared, and the oppressive feeling in the room lifted like a heavy weight being removed from my shoulders. "Mom," Danny said, his voice sounding like his own again. "I think it worked." I climbed down from the ladder and pulled him into a tight hug. Janet was crying, tears of relief streaming down her face. "Is it over?" she asked. Danny nodded. Marcus crossed over. I can't hear him anymore, but I felt him say thank you. And the angry spirits, they're gone too. The pattern sent them away. As if to confirm his words, the symbols on the ceiling gave one last gentle pulse, then faded completely, leaving only faint chalk marks that looked like nothing more than a child's drawings. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of birds singing outside Danny's window, a sound I realized I hadn't heard in months. The oppressive atmosphere that had been hanging over our house was completely gone, replaced by a sense of peace and normalcy that felt almost foreign after everything we'd been through. Danny was already awake, sitting at his desk drawing, but this time, he was drawing rockets and dinosaurs, normal 7-year-old subjects. The symbols on his ceiling were barely visible now, looking like faded chalk marks that could have been there for years. "How are you feeling, baby?" I asked, sitting on the edge of his bed. He looked up at me with bright, clear eyes, eyes that looked entirely his own for the first time in months. "Good. Really good. I had the best sleep I've had in forever." "Any dreams?" "Just normal ones. I dreamed about going to Disney World." He grinned. "Can we go sometime, Mom?" I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in ages. "We'll see. Maybe for your birthday." Janet called around noon to check on us. "How's Danny doing?" "Like a completely different kid. He's downstairs watching cartoons and eating cereal, acting like nothing unusual ever happened." "And how are you?" I looked around the house, noting how bright and airy it felt with the morning sun streaming through the windows. "Better. Much better." "Janet, I know how crazy this sounds, but I think we actually did it. I think we helped Marcus find peace." I keep thinking about what Danny said about the other families in the neighborhood. Do you think they're safe now? I hope so. I guess we'll know if. My doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. Janet, let me call you back.
Someone's at the door.
I hung up and went to answer it. Standing on my porch was Mrs. Chen from 3 houses down, holding a casserole dish and smiling. Sarah, dear, I hope you don't mind me bothering you, but I had to come by and thank you. Thank me?
For what?
I don't know how to explain it, but last night something changed. For months, my house has felt wrong. Cold spots, strange noises, my daughter having nightmares every night. But this morning, everything feels normal again. Peaceful. My daughter slept through the night for the first time in months. I felt a chill of recognition. Mrs. Chin, what does your daughter's nightmares usually involve? The strangest thing, she kept drawing symbols on her walls and saying there was a sad man in her room. But this morning, she couldn't even remember having the dreams. After Mrs. Chen left, I walked around the neighborhood, and everywhere I went, I heard similar stories. The Johnsons mentioned that their teenage son had stopped having his episodes of sleepwalking. The Martinez family said their baby had finally started sleeping through the night. The elderly Mr. Patterson told me he'd been seeing shadowy figures in his house for months, but they'd suddenly disappeared. 15 families, just like Danny had said. That afternoon, I decided to do some research about Marcus Whitmore. I found his obituary in the Salem Evening News Archives, dated December 15, 1943. The article was brief, but it mentioned that he'd been a respected architect in Boston before his breakdown, and that his family had all perished in a house fire in 1942. But what caught my attention was a small notation at the bottom of the article. Mr. Whitmore's architectural firm specialized in sacred geometry and buildings designed to promote healing and spiritual wellness. I smiled, thinking about the peace that had settled over our neighborhood. Even in death, Marcus had been trying to heal, to bring peace to the place where he'd suffered. That evening, Danny and I sat on the front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The neighborhood felt alive and normal, kids playing in their yards, families walking their dogs, the sounds of dinner being prepared in kitchen windows.
Mom,
Danny said, leaning against my shoulder. I'm glad we helped Uncle Teddy and Marcus. Me too, baby. Me too. Do you think they're happy now? I thought about Marcus, trapped for 80 years, finally finding the peace he'd been searching for. I thought about Theodore, who died trying to complete a task that had ultimately saved an entire neighborhood. I think they're exactly where they need to be, I said, wrapping my arms around my son. As we sat there, I noticed something carved into the wooden railing of our porch, something that hadn't been there before. It was a small symbol, barely visible unless you were looking for it, but I recognized it from Theodore's journal. It was Marcus's signature, carved in elegant script, with a small heart underneath. A final thank you. 3 months later, our lives had settled into a new rhythm. Danny was thriving in school, his teacher commenting on how much more focused and engaged he'd become. The nightmares were a thing of the past, replaced by dreams of adventures and discoveries that he'd excitedly share with me over breakfast. I'd started taking on more freelance work, and for the first time since the divorce, I felt like I could actually get ahead financially. The house felt like a home again, warm and welcoming, filled with laughter and the normal sounds of a family building a life together. Janet visited regularly, and we developed a tradition of Sunday dinners where we'd talk about everything except the night that changed our lives. Some experiences are too profound for casual conversation, but the bond we'd formed during those dark hours had strengthened our relationship in ways I'd never expected. The neighborhood had transformed too. The Maple Heights community had become closer, more connected. People were friendlier, more likely to stop and chat, to help each other out. It was as if Marcus's crossing over had lifted a veil that had been separating us all. One evening in early spring, I was working in my office when Danny called out from upstairs. "Mom, can you come here for a minute?" I found him in his room, standing by his window and looking out at the yard. The symbols on his ceiling had completely faded away, leaving no trace of the supernatural events we'd experienced.
"What is it, sweetie?"
Look, he said, pointing outside. I followed his gaze and gasped. In the corner of our backyard, where nothing had grown for as long as we'd lived in the house, a small garden had appeared. Flowers I'd never planted were blooming in perfect geometric patterns, spirals and mandalas that echoed the symbols Danny had drawn, but made of living beauty instead of supernatural urgency. "They're beautiful," I whispered. "Marcus left them for us," Danny said with certainty. "He wanted us to have something pretty to remember him by." I put my arm around my son's shoulders and we stood there together, watching the flowers sway in the evening breeze. The last rays of sunlight caught the petals, making them glow with a soft, natural light that was nothing like the supernatural luminescence we'd witnessed, but somehow even more magical. "Danny, are you okay with everything that happened? I mean, really okay?"
He looked up at me with his wise 7-year-old eyes.
"I'm glad we could help them, Mom. Uncle Teddy and Marcus were just lost, you know? They needed someone to care enough to help them find their way home.
And now they have."
"Yeah. And now we have our home back too." That night, I tucked Danny into bed and sat with him for a while, just like I used to when he was smaller. The room felt peaceful, safe, filled with the quiet contentment that comes from having faced something difficult and emerged stronger on the other side.
"Mom,"
Danny said sleepily, "I love you." "I love you too, baby. Sweet dreams."
"They will be," he said with a smile.
"They always are now." I kissed his forehead and turned off the light, leaving his astronaut nightlight to cast its gentle glow across the room. No more supernatural phenomena, no more mysterious symbols, just a little boy's room filled with the normal magic of childhood. As I walked downstairs, I caught a glimpse of movement in the backyard. For just a moment, I thought I saw two figures standing by the flower garden, one tall and distinguished, the other shorter and more familiar. They raised their hands in what looked like a farewell gesture, and then they were gone, leaving only the gentle rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. I smiled and went to make myself a cup of tea, feeling grateful for the reminder that some stories do have happy endings, even when they begin in the darkest places. Outside, the flowers in Marcus's garden glowed softly in the moonlight, a living testament to the power of compassion, courage, and the unbreakable bonds between family members, both living and departed.